Living longer, living healthier, living better than ever before. Welcome to Mountain Pacific's Healthy Living for Life, a weekly series that gives you the information, education, and expert insight you need to become an active participant in today's ever-changing healthcare climate. Here now is today's program host.
A chronic disease or serious illness can change your life forever. When you or a loved one is faced with fighting a disease like cancer, how do you stay strong to fight the fight of your life? And what resources are out there to help? Today's show is going to talk about just that. Welcome to Healthy Living for Life, a show dedicated to helping you do just that. I'm Beth Brown, your host. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Healthy Living for Life. We're joined now by Chelsea Rice. Chelsea is a cancer survivor, and thanks so much for being with us, Chelsea.
Thanks for having me.
So what type of cancer did you have, and how long did your treatments last?
I had squamous cell carcinoma of the bladder, which is a rare carcinoma. Only about 2% of the population is diagnosed with it. And I was diagnosed in 2012, and it's been about 6 to 7 years since I was diagnosed. So
congratulations on that.
Thank you so much.
And so what were the treatments that you did, and how long did those last?
I did chemotherapy followed by a radical cystectomy, so an 8-hour surgery, followed by physical therapy. And I still periodically have to go through physical therapy to regain strength in places that were compromised because of the surgery.
Wow, that's a lot. So can you go back before that and kind of talk about what you went through when you were first diagnosed?
Yeah, initially there was a lot of self-blame, and to respond to what you asked before, and the acute treatment of the cancer was about a year long, but recovery was much longer. And initially I did a lot of self-blame, and I wondered why exactly I had gotten cancer, and did a lot of crying on the floor, throwing myself around, and screaming at the sky, and then started practicing sitting quietly and gratitude lists in order to gain control over that anxiety.
And so was that the main way that you were able to kind of get emotionally and physically ready for your treatment?
Yeah, I mean, I had anxiety that would disrupt my sleep, and so in the morning I'd wake up and watch the sunrise, and I would count the things that I was thankful for, all the way from my community to the trees. And at night before I fell asleep, I'd do the same thing until I fell asleep, and that really helped me to put things into perspective.
And so would you recommend that, or what kind of tips would you give to people who might find themselves in a similar situation where they have a battle ahead of them? How do you get prepared for something like that?
I think practically preparation is, well, it's different for everyone. I do think having somebody outside of your family or immediate caretaker to speak with is really helpful, because your caretaker will hear over and over again the kind of struggles that you're having, as well as your best friends. But to find somebody who is autonomous of the situation really helps. And there's a wonderful program through a nonprofit called Immerman's Angels, and they do survivor mentorship. And I had people that I talked to consistently about side effects and coping and surgery and how to live a better quality of life after treatment.
Okay, so finding those support groups, you would recommend that?
Yes, they're helpful for some people, for others they're not, but definitely someone outside of your immediate circle who can handle the conversation.
So we hear a lot about people saying that, well, if you have a positive attitude, you're going to make it through. What would you say about that?
I don't think that positivity plays a part in recovery much. I think we say have a positive attitude, and that really is harmful to some people who don't survive, because you can't always control survivorship with positivity. For me, I'm a natural optimist, so it was easy for me to be happy and bring gratitude to my life, but it's not for everyone.
Well, can you talk a little bit about maybe the role that friends and family played in kind of supporting you through your treatment and everything that happened?
The community of Helena and my community at Carroll College and Helena College and the places where I was working at the time really stepped up to make sure that me and my spouse were taken care of. They dropped off food, they raised money, the LGBTQ community raised money, and we had no idea they were doing so, which was really surprising and wonderful. but also my friends back in Portland through fundraisers to ensure that I would have money to get the surgery I need, as well as recovery time, because I was denied insurance and coverage for my treatment from the beginning to the end.
So that had to be really hard. So it was great that you got people that rallied around you. Did you find yourself ever not maybe always telling everybody the full story of what was going on? Or there are lots of people who don't want to be a burden. You know, that's their concern. I don't want to be a burden on my friends. I don't want to be a burden on my family. What's your advice?
Ooh, advice is so not my thing. I think that's why I went to a mentor, because I did feel that burden of repetition of, oh, I'm sick, oh, I'm tired, oh, this hurts. And that mentor always knew. And I just, yeah, you can cut that part out here because
this is not really your cup of tea. Okay, well then let's talk about asking for help, because you obviously sought out that mentor. Can you talk about that a little bit and how that helped you?
Absolutely. When people asked me if they could help, I found that the most important thing is it was easy to say, I would love your help. Can you pick up some, soy milk and bread and butter for us? Or would you get the groceries and pick up the dog poop? So people feel so helpless and they want something to do. And it's easy for us to say, no, I'm fine. But I think people appreciate having a way to support you through illness.
Okay, that's great advice. See, you are good at it. And so we have time for maybe one more question. I'm actually going to ask you to give advice one more time. So for people who have friends and family or know someone who is going through a chronic illness, something that really is a battle or life-changing, what's your words of wisdom there?
I think that having someone else support the caregiver to that person, like a tertiary caregiver, if it can be found, because even having one caregiver can sometimes be difficult, but having a tertiary caregiver who can go to doctor's appointments and take notes, or be somebody who sits at the house while the patient sleeps, is really important, because both the patient and the caregiver, their brains are clouded because of the trauma and the information that's coming at them. So having somebody else is awesome.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. That's all the time we have, but we really appreciate you coming on and talking about this. Great advice. So we do need to take a quick break, but up next we'll be talking to hospital-based social workers. So we're going to pause here for a break and we'll be right back to talk to them after this. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're talking to Lindsey Smith and Tina Stern. Both ladies are social workers at St. Peter's Health, and thanks so much for being here, ladies. Okay, Lindsey, so let's start with you. How important would you say it is for someone to really think about their feelings and their emotions when it comes to dealing with a chronic disease or illness?
Yeah, that's honestly one of the most important things to do, especially with a new diagnosis or something that is chronic or life-changing. Just being able to process through all the thoughts and feelings and emotions that you're having surrounding that new diagnosis. It's grief in a way. So there's going to be different stages that you might go through, and there are different methods that you can use to help you process through that, of talking to people, talking to friends, family, and loved ones, and writing it down can be especially helpful.
Okay. And sometimes with treatment or with the condition or disease itself, people might see changes in their bodies or the way they look. What kind of tips or advice would you give to folks who might be undergoing something like that?
So typically when we're working with somebody with a chronic illness, or when I specifically work with patients who are undergoing cancer treatment, there is going to be a significant change in body image and appearance. And so typically we'll sit down and have a discussion prior to treatment, during treatment, and even after treatment, and just touching base. There are also resources that are readily available. For in the cancer world, some of our patients will end up losing their hair if they do chemotherapy, and there are resources that are available as far as wigs, hats, scarves. So we just try to meet the patient where the patient is at and continue a dialogue around that, because sometimes it is difficult for people when they're in a vulnerable state to let us truly know how they're feeling.
Okay. And if it's something that is chronic or is going to take a long time to treat, that kind of becomes a person's new norm, dealing with that condition or that disease. How do you help people cope with that?
You know, I would say the new norm is going to be different for everyone. Everyone is going to have their own unique experience, even if they have the same diagnosis as someone else. And so it's kind of the same things that we've talked about, you know, using that support system that you have through friends and family, but also taking the time to identify the positive aspects or things that are happening in your life that are different than what's going on with you medically, to kind of focus on and keep that spirit or
Because I would imagine for either the person who has the diagnosis or even for someone who's taking care of them or loves them, anxiety, depression, those kind of feelings can be normal, and a lot of people experience those. So how do you cope with those, or how do you help people get through that anxiety or even depression?
I think first and foremost what we do when we meet with patients is some facilities, and it's different it's different in every hospital typically, but we will where we are at, we'll do a distress screening to see if somebody is at risk for depression or anxiety. Some facilities will do a PHQ-9, which does screen for depression. And if we do have a patient or even a family member who expresses depression or anxiety, for a family member, we provide a list of community resources. So community therapists, psychotherapists that can help with that process. For our patients specifically, we'll notify the MD, the doctor that works directly with the patient, and then we'll also provide, if it's brief psychotherapy, we can provide that within the clinic. If it needs to be more long-term, then we'll refer out. So we do have the resources to connect our patients and their families with support services.
That's awesome. And we talked with Chelsea a little bit before the break about feeling like a burden on your friends or family when you're sick. Can you talk a little bit about what advice would you give that it's okay to ask for help, and how do you do that?
You know, absolutely it is okay to ask for help, and just knowing that aside from friends and family or your neighborhood or the community that you live directly in, there's also agency-based resources or other resources in the community that can jump in and provide that extra support. Rocky Mountain Development Council, some volunteer programs like Splashes of Joy, those are services available in our community. But also, I know Tina has talked about being able to also, on the other side, say, no, you know, today I don't need help. Today I just need to be me and do my self-care and not be pampered or waited on by other people. So.
And I think the biggest piece with that is communication is key. And sometimes when I meet with patients, they say, well, I feel as though I'm burdening my family. But when we bring the whole family system in together and we'll do a family meeting, the family members don't feel as though they're being a burden. They feel as though they are doing the best that they can when their loved one is going through a significant life change. Okay. And so they want to be able to help in any way that they can. So it really comes down to that communication piece.
And in those instances where maybe they don't have that communication, what about on the friends and family that want to help, but the patient isn't really asking for help? You know, what advice would you give to them? How can they chip in?
So on my end of things, I actually have a little booklet that I give to the patient that they can give to their family and friends that specifically outlines that of how can I be a friend to someone with cancer, and it walks through how they can be supportive.
And can you share some tips maybe that are in that book?
So if an individual is needing help with meals, they make the meals, light housekeeping, taking the dog for a walk, even going over, and I hear this frequently, the light housekeeping component is huge. That sometimes chronically ill individuals, patients diagnosed with a chronic illness or with going through cancer treatment, there's a lot of fatigue. So anything that somebody can do to really take the burden off of the housekeeping, even walking to the mailbox to get the mail for someone.
Okay.
So those are just little tips, I guess.
Those are perfect.
How friends can help.
You. Okay, we are out of time. We need to stop and take a quick break here, but we are going to continue this conversation with Lindsey and Tina. So we're going to take this commercial break, and we'll be back right after this. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're continuing our conversation with Lindsey Smith and Tina Stern, and thanks for sticking around with us, ladies. So when someone has a disease or illness and their friends and family are trying to be supportive, do you recommend that they also learn about the disease or illness that their loved one has, or what's your recommendation there?
So our recommendation is typically that if the patient is wanting for the family or friends to have more information in regard to the disease process or the diagnosis, we first and foremost ask the patient for permission. And typically what I'll do is involve a nurse who really has a medical understanding of the diagnosis, and yet I can provide the psychosocial support. And we'll have a meeting together with the patient, the family member, or the friend, and really so that we can provide robust material and provide that support that may be needed not only for the patient but for the loved one as well.
Okay. And in addition to learning about the condition, do you also talk about how they can help take care of the person who has that disease or condition?
So typically yes, and that's where it's beneficial to have a nurse along with the social worker so that we can work hand in hand, not only to discuss for the caregiver how they can take care of themselves, both emotionally and physically, but also what are going to be the potential needs of the patient physically and emotionally.
Okay, great. And so then how important would you say it is for a caregiver to make sure that he or she is taking care of him or herself as well as the patient?
Oh, absolutely, very important. Self-care is a big component of that, because in order to care for someone else, you need to be healthy too, emotionally and physically, to be able to be a good caregiver for that loved one.
And are there generally support groups that help with that, either for the patient or the caregiver or both, or how do people get that support that they need?
There are caregiver support groups. Some are held through the hospital or the healthcare system. Rocky Mountain Development Council is, again, a good resource for some of those services, and even has the ability to offer respite care to help patients when families are unable to.
How about those folks who may not live very close to a hospital or some of those resources? Any advice on how they might be able to seek out support?
So with our online resources nowadays, there are several apps and websites that any social worker can direct the patient to. There's also a program called Immerman Angels for individuals who have a cancer diagnosis. It's a mentor program, and the mentor is actually provided over the phone, and it's somebody who has a similar diagnosis who's able to share their experience, strength, and hope, and be able to relate to that individual.
That's awesome. And so we've been talking a lot about the emotional support. What about when it comes to actually treating or caring for the disease or the condition? Because that can be a lifestyle change, doing things completely different than they've done before. How do you support people in making those changes so they stick to what they're supposed to be doing with their care?
Lifestyle changes are the biggest thing and big barrier for people that they run into, because those lifestyle changes are difficult. Changes in nutrition, changes in functional ability, and just taking your time, taking it step by step, and recognizing, okay, if I have to change 5 things with my diet, it's okay to start with 1 and then work on the next one. And then functional limitations, just learning to recognize that your mobility might be impaired, but there might be ways that you can modify or work around that so that you're still independent, or as independent as you can be.
And you sort of alluded to this earlier about people saying, I don't want to be pampered today. Are there times when the friends, the family, that support system can get a little overbearing, and how do you handle that kind of a situation?
Absolutely, absolutely. There are times, I have plenty of patients who have said, I don't want to hurt my family members' feelings. I don't want to, they're doing so much for me, but this is too much. And so typically we'll sit down and go over some verbiage about how it's okay to say no. And it's okay to tell your family member, thank you so much for all that you're doing for me. Today, I just want a day for me. And really going over that, my needs and expectations may change from day to day given where I'm at with how I'm feeling. And so just being very clear and open and honest with the loved one or caregiver or family member or friend.
Okay, great. That's good advice. And I would imagine too, at some point the conversation, depending on the condition or the disease, would turn to end of life conversations and what happens there. So how do you support that whole process, and any advice you would give for folks who find themselves in that situation?
Talking about, there's so many different options when it comes to those conversations, and just supporting them where they're at with the current stage that they're in with their illness and what they're experiencing, and just providing that emotional support in the way of supportive listening and empathy, but also just making sure that they know all of the different options that they have available to them. It doesn't have to look one way or be the same as someone else has experienced. There's hospice, there's palliative care, there's continuing treatments, all kinds of different ways that they could look at it and decide what's best for them moving forward.
So we are almost out of time. Any closing thoughts or things you want to make sure, maybe something we haven't touched on or you want to make sure people really heard before we go?
I think just know that in the community, social workers are available. In the majority of hospitals, social workers are available. And so if somebody is needing or wanting to speak with a social worker, to ask.
Okay, perfect. Okay, perfect. Ladies, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you to Chelsea as well for sharing her story. That's all we have. See you next week. And in the meantime, stay fit, stay well, and stay healthy for life with Healthy Living for Life. We'll see you next week.
Healthy Living for Life is brought to you by Mountain Pacific Quality Health. We'd love to hear from you. If you have suggestions for future programs, visit our website at mpqhf.org or call us at 406-443-4020. You can also catch us on YouTube by visiting our website and clicking on the YouTube icon. Special thanks to Fire Tower Coffee House and Roasters. Production facilities provided by Video Express Productions.